And welcome to our community. Susie Thomas here with you this morning, and we're visiting with Eric Yazuski. He is from the Domestic Violence Project, Inc. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
DVPI for short.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Eric, you've been with them for how long now?
Just heading over the 2 years, actually, this past month. So just over 2 years.
Awesome. And your role there at DVPI is?
Yeah, I am the event and volunteer director at DVPI.
So you just finished a couple of big events. Tell us a little bit about Walk a Mile in Her Shoes and Take Back the Night.
Yeah, absolutely. Our Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event is an annual fundraiser awareness outreach event that DVPI holds annually. And this year we ended up on First Friday here in October. Some of the past years we've had a little bit of bad luck with weather, but this past one was beautiful. We had close to about 30 people that turned out for the event, and that event is centered around men wearing high-heeled shoes or their selection of a woman's shoe for the evening. And what we do is we end up taking a walk, and it's all about awareness for sexual assault and gender-based violence. So great event.
It's a fun event. It's a fun way of looking at a very serious topic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How do you talk these guys into wearing high heels? I was at First Friday, saw the guys down there. So yeah, talk about that a bit.
It's always interesting, and some guys are reluctant at first, but after you let them know what the overarching cause is for it. A lot of guys are really on board with it, and it definitely helps because domestic violence, gender-based violence is on the rise, in the country especially, and it's one of those issues that a lot of them end up actually holding close to their heart. They have family members that may have been affected by it, so once we explain a little bit more about it, it generally takes off.
A great way to raise awareness. What about Take Back the Night?
So Take Back the Night, we collaborated this year with the YWCA Canton, and this is the close to 20th year of hosting this event. We are partnered up with Malone University also there, and this year we had several speakers. We did bystander intervention. We had a survivor story. And generally the entire goal of the evening is to support an atmosphere of truly taking back the night, of being a bit of light in quite often a very dark world, especially when it comes to domestic violence. So the goal of that evening really was to be a light in the community and to take a stand against the violence.
I want to circle back to something you just said. Domestic violence is on the rise?
Yeah, and really what we've noticed since DVPI has become even more present in our communities, the absolute necessities of our services, just to give you an example, just this past year, we served close to 4,000 people with our 24-hour hotline. And that hotline is staffed 24 hours a day by an actual human person. But if you can imagine, 4,000 calls to that hotline in a year. So right there, that shows you how much DVPI is needed here in our community.
When you're talking about those 4,000 people, where did they come from? What is your outreach area?
Sure. Mostly, we do target Stark County, but calls come in from all over the place, and our goal is to meet the needs of the person that's calling us as quickly as we can. So, obviously, there are some more urgent needs of getting people out of abusive situations, but really it's an opportunity to talk to someone and also start a safety planning process. So
our listenership would be in Stark County, certainly, but also Carroll County, Tuscarawas County, Wayne County, Holmes County.
Absolutely.
Where do those people go?
We are more than willing to serve anyone that comes to DVPI, but also, if you're headed over toward Alliance, there's an Alliance TV shelter. So our entire goal is to get survivors and victims the assistance that they need. So if they aren't able to get to us in our Canton or Massillon location, we are certainly going to do everything we can to get them to a safe situation by providing them with an outlet wherever they may be.
Those 4,000 calls, is it because you exist and that years ago people suffered more in silence? Is that why it seems to be so much on the rise? Are we just more aware now, or are there more instances of this taking place?
Yeah, and I think that, that's a great point. It's become, while it's a very kind of taboo subject, you can see it pretty much any day you open up the paper or scan the news online. I think in the past couple years, especially with pro athletes being involved on that end, it's really kind of blown it up into the mainstream media, which obviously has helped us quite a bit in terms of being able to serve more people because, like you had said, in the past, it was kind of something that people didn't want to talk about. And now we have an outlet to get people help. And that's one of the most important things for us, too, is domestic violence isn't always the easiest thing to talk about. So what we're trying to do is provide an outlet to do so.
Eric Yazuski is Director of Events and Volunteers at DVPI, the Domestic Violence Project, Inc. What we're talking about crosses all kinds of socioeconomic lines, doesn't it, Eric?
Absolutely, absolutely. And for us especially, rich, poor, male, female, people in the LGBTQI communities, children, DVPI truly does work to serve all of those groups of people, no matter what background you come from. If you need the assistance, DVPI is there to provide that.
You said you should have a safety plan. What does that mean? What would that entail?
Sure, absolutely. For us and for safety planning, one of the most important parts of dealing with the issue of domestic violence is starting to come up with a plan of how to be safe. If you're in an abusive situation, it's deciding what steps you can take to try and minimize your risk. But that's one of the things that within our shelters, our advocates are great at doing. They sit down with each client and make a safety plan. So it's an integral part of being a survivor of domestic violence is having some sort of plan.
Let's give a number, because step one of any plan would be to call you. What's the hotline number?
Absolutely. Our hotline number is 330-453-SAFE, and that's 330-453-7233.
Great. You know what, Eric? Sometimes people don't really have a definition for abuse. We're not always talking about something that leaves a scar, a physical scar.
Yeah.
It could lead to an emotional scar as well. Talk about what is abuse in a relationship.
Absolutely. And I think, so oftentimes when people think of domestic violence, they think of physical abuse. I mean, it's the most plain insight thing that you can kind of recognize. But domestic violence also involves mental violence. And that is definitely one of those things nowadays in our culture where with social media, everything like that, domestic violence truly is under a much larger umbrella now when it comes to abuse. And it is hard to recognize sometimes the signs of abuse if they aren't physical. But that also is one of the areas that our Renew Recovery and Counseling Center is able to help out with. It's our counseling center at DVPI. We also have a satellite location in Massillon. And basically it is for those instances, not just of physical abuse, but also for mental abuse as well. So we serve close to about 400 clients every quarter. So really, if you look at that, that's translating to about 1,600 people a year. So
someone could call you and say, my normal doesn't seem like other people's normal. Can I talk about it? They could just do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with Renew, our counseling center there, we provide our services to men, women, children, people in the LGBTQI community, regardless of ability to pay. So our goal at DVPI is to get you the help and assistance that you need. So
it's tough to bring up if it's something that a person is going through themselves. What about if you have a friend and you really suspect that they're in an abusive situation? Do you have some tips on how to approach that subject with them? What do you do?
Yeah, and I think, it's really that especially, there's a very fine line between recognizing the signs and actually being able to have a constructive conversation with somebody about that. Obviously, if it's someone you care about, then it's being able to have a conversation with them is something that should happen. But you should note that not all people are ready to have that conversation,
Right.
both as a victim of abuse as well as a friend. So really, it's kind of broaching the subject in terms and on grounds that are they may not be comfortable, but they're also agreeable for both parties. So.
Are there some signs that you should look for? I mean, I had a friend who wore sunglasses all the time.
Sure.
There's got to be some flags. What we should be aware of?
I think, kind of some of the outright ones, like you said, people, if it's physical abuse, are always kind of trying to cover up the abuse. I mean, the symptoms of the abuse. So, bruises, black and blue marks, things like that, wearing sunglasses, if it's facial injuries. Kind of, I guess, less common sometimes nowadays is repetitively missing work due to either an abuser not allowing the person to leave their home or because they've been injured. So really it takes all different forms. But those are kind of some of the largest, I guess, outwardly recognizable signs too. And not being able to kind of have conversations, always kind of trying to defend things in that realm. So always very, very difficult and different from person to person.
And again, we're talking about domestic violence between two partners. If it's a child that's in question, you are required to report that, yes?
Right, and that also brings up a very tricky situation and very fine lines again, because especially in those instances, you want to be positive that's what's happening and that it's not a false call or a false report going in. So again, very fine line there. But again, if you're having issues with that, helping to define those things, give us a call at DVPI and we can try and help you sort that out too.
Sometimes situations build. They start off, where someone says, okay, I can cope with this. Mm-hmm. And then they build at such small increments. It's almost like the frog being thrown into cold water and you turn up the heat 1 degree at a time until it eventually boils to death.
Right.
At what point does a person know that it's time to contact DVPI?
That's a good question. And I think sometimes there are people that never get to that point because, with the cycle of violence, it really is kind of like that. You really become acclimated to that climate. And so really, it's each person's comfortability, like we just talked about. If there's someone that's willing to talk to the other party about this, to kind of give them an idea of, hey, this is definitely not normal behavior for a partner, for a spouse. So it really, it's sad to say some people never get there, but some people do eventually try and break that cycle of violence, and that's usually when they reach out to us.
Okay. We're speaking with Eric Yazuski. He is Director of Events and Volunteers at DVPI. Let's give the hotline again, Eric. What should people call?
Yeah, absolutely. Our hotline is 330-453-7233. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, that is staffed by a human being 24 hours a day. So if you call our hotline, you're not going to get a recorded voicemail telling you to call back at 8 o'clock in the morning. You will actually talk to a human being. So 330-453-7233. Absolutely.
And I stepped right on you. Say that again.
Oh, yeah,
please.
absolutely. 330-453-7233.
And that spells?
Safe.
Great. Awesome. We are going to take a short break. After these words, we'll be back. You're listening to Our Community.